All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to CMX Spark. Hopefully, you have been joining us all day today and enjoying all of these incredible sessions. Really excited to have you all here. Let us know where you're tuning in from in the chat box. I'm coming to you from Malaga, Spain. My name is Seppi, rhymes with Peppy, and I'm the MC here today on the discussion stage. So I'm originally from the US, but living here in Malaga, as I said. I'm the founder of a community called She Hit Refresh and also the co-host of CMX Connect Madrid. Used to live in Madrid, so that's why I'm part of that. If you are watching us here, I do want you to know that you're probably gonna have a lot of questions during the session, so please drop them in the Q&A box at the top of the chat there, and we'll get to those at the end of the session. All right, so without further ado, I want you guys to help me introduce or give a warm welcome to our next speaker. Our next speaker is actually the recipient of the CMX 2021 Community Professional of the Year Award for an independent community. Amazing. Please give a warm round of applause for Phin Mpofu. He is the Director of Partner Success and Community at Startup Grind. Passing over the mic to you, Phin.
Thank you so much, Seppi. What a fantastic introduction. Welcome, everyone. I'm really looking forward to this presentation that I'll be doing for you. I promise I didn't touch any buttons, but I think I was just taking off presenter mode there. But I'm back, so hopefully you can all see me nice and clearly, and you can hear me clearly in the chat section. Feel free to say yes and hello and give me a shout out from wherever you are in the world. So as Seppi kindly mentioned, my name is Phin. I lead our partner and success teams over at Startup Grind. I've been a part of the Startup Grind community for well over 7 years. In those 7 years, I've personally launched 4 chapters, which I believe is a record, but no one is yet to beat that, or either is crazy enough to do that yet. And in today's presentation, I'm going to share with you the strategy and exact tech stack playbook we used at Startup Grind when the pandemic hit last year that allowed us to scale and host over 2,500 events over a 12-month period. It was certainly no mean feat. And it was not a solo act, so I definitely cannot take credit for many of the things that were done here. It was very much a team effort. So with that being said, let's dive into the presentation. So there we go. I absolutely love this picture. I think this picture that we have up here really illustrated what the vision was and the goal was when it came to virtual events. It was essentially trying to climb this virtual events summit, as it were, and how we as Startup Grind were going to do that to be able to plant our flag truly and squarely at the top of that summit. Like any summit that you're essentially going to be looking to climb, it's like a journey, and you really need to be prepared along the way and make sure that you have the toolkit and the resources that will essentially allow you to climb that summit successfully. And that was really the way we looked at it as the Startup Grind team. So as I mentioned a little earlier on, this was by no means a solo act. I wish we were certainly able to bring in all the people that were involved in allowing us to be massively successful in hosting our, in delivering our virtual event strategy for our global community. But the faces you see in front of there, we like colloquially call ourselves the C team. In the Startup Grind like HQ team, we call ourselves the C team, which is almost like a play on the A team. Clearly showing my age now for those people that have ever watched the A team, and you have all these characters in there like B.A. Baracus and Face and all these other individuals, where it was like all about, we love it when a plan comes together. And I think for us as the C team, as the community team, that was very much our adage as we went about trying to really build out our strategy and the tech stack we were looking to implement for our virtual events strategies. A few things which we'll touch on very, very quickly. For those that are maybe not too familiar with Startup Grind, I'll maybe share a little bit of background about us. We are the world's largest startup community. We were founded by Derek Addison, who also happens to be the founder of Bevy. So honestly, this worked out very, very well. We always refer to Bevy as our sister company, and we love them very, very dearly. But when you look at our history, we have traditionally been an in-person community that hosts local events, typically every single month, in these local chapter these local chapter ecosystems. And our chapter directors, who we very much view as our chapter leaders, love bringing people together. They really love kind of talking about some of our values, which are make friends, help others, and give first. But they love to do that in person. So, of course, when the world last year kind of came to a standstill, that required a massive shift for them as leaders and for us as the HQ community team on how we were going to truly help them to ensure that they can still keep their local startup ecosystems engaged. And typically for many of them, bear in mind we are a global community, but for many of them, the only way to do that was essentially through virtual events. Now, what's ironic about this is the picture you see in front of you, this was actually taken at our February global conference last year in 2020. And when I look at this picture now, I mean, you can think like, look at how close we all are. We've got, 100+ chapter directors on the stage there. And it was such a grand old time, but who'd have thought that 30 days later, the world would be a very, very different place and would have essentially kind of shut down. Now, when we all left this conference that we host, our Startup Grind Global Conference is hosted in Redwood City in Silicon Valley every year. When the HQ team and our chapter directors all flew back after the conference, so I fly back to Berkshire in England, and I'm looking at our Startup Grind Bevy dashboard where we kind of track all our events. And I'm like, something is very wrong here. We start then getting these various notifications from our chapter directors that they're having to cancel events because a local lockdown has been put into place. At that time, typically we would have about 100, 110 events that we would host at any given point in time during the month. But there are about 40 events on the platform for the month of March. So as a community team, we got together and we were a little worried here. We were like, our in-person community is literally starting to crumble. And if we do not do something about it and take a concerted effort to keep our Startup Grind community alive, our Startup Grind community is going to die. And I think that was the last thing that the C team, our merry band of mates, wanted, that all these years that we had kind of invested to really build out these local startup ecosystems, that it was going to, just wither away and die. And so being a startup organization, we really started to apply some of the startup principles in a way when it comes to, being agile, being lean, building MVPs, iterating very, very quickly to help us succeed. But before we could kind of dive into all of that, we really had to break things down into two elements, which I always say. The first being a strategy. And I always say, when you're looking to kind of tackle any particular problem in time, there's almost like a formula behind it, right? Very similar to how 1 + 1 = 2 or 2 + 3 = 5. It's always great to kind of put a formula in place. Our formula was very, very simple. The way we looked at it, we say strategy plus tactics equals success. So let me repeat that again. A very simple formula that we use. Strategy plus tactics equals success. Now, strategy means some things to different people, but for us, we were very, very kind of aware as to the way we wanted to approach our strategy and our tactics, and ultimately, hopefully, that if we did things very, very well, that would lead to success. So our strategy was also a little bit like a mission statement, and it was to enable and equip our global chapter director community to continue to keep their local startup communities engaged by hosting virtual events. Now, I've highlighted some two keywords there: enable and equip. Right, those are intentions, so items that we definitely want to do. We wanted to enable our chapter directors, that is, give them the tools and resources and ability and know-how and education to essentially do that. And equip, once again, really being the tools and the resources to allow them to essentially continue to keep the local startup communities engaged. And then the how were they going to do that was by hosting virtual events. So for us, we were very, very clear when we did like our brainstorming session as a community team. And I'm very mindful that maybe not many of you might be either 1 or 2 person community teams, or you might be a solo community professional on your own. But some of you may have the great fortune of being like a 4, 5, 6, maybe even a 10 person community team, but it's worth all kind of brainstorming. And even if you are, just as a slight tip, even if you are a solo community professional in your organization, you have to become very, very good at lobbying and working with other teams cross-functionally, whether it is the engineering team or the marketing team, or even executive leadership. I was watching a talk earlier on about how to kind of basically get buy-in from executive leadership. If you're a solo community professional within your company, you have to become very, very good at lobbying and working cross-functionally with other teams. We were fortunate that we were, of course, part of the team. So this allowed us to do a brainstorming session and really come up with a concerted strategy that would allow us to execute our tactics. So if strategy is like the grand vision and your roadmap and the direction, and essentially gives you your North Star, your tactics are the hows. Your tactic is the exact things you should be doing that will allow you to essentially execute upon your strategic vision and your strategic mission, if depending on whether you're using a vision or a mission statement. But your tactics will be exactly what will allow you to do that. Some people call tactics frameworks, so depending, if you went to a certain business school or you've kind of, looked up some interesting conversations on the internet, but tactics can sometimes be referred to as like a framework of how you go about looking to achieve things. You can borrow frameworks and tactics from other organizations, but it also requires you to have an in-depth knowledge of your community, which will allow you to essentially really build out some of the tactics that will allow you to do so. So in our case, our tactics, which is really the tech stack playbook piece, was execution, education, an iterative process, equipment, so the tools in the tech stack, and empathy, which I'll touch on shortly. So I'm going to go through each one to really kind of give you the meat and bones, as it were, of how we can kind of really achieve our success that allowed us to host 100 of local monthly events. So the first tactics was execution. You have got to take action. It was no point for us having these really grand strategy sessions and brainstorming sessions. We knew that we absolutely needed to take action as a team. And again, we had great fortunes that as part of our team, a number of us were technically minded. So we were almost like a company within the team, that we had people that were really good at technology, others that were really good at putting together systems and processes, others that were very, very strong at strategies, others that were fantastic at almost like customer success and customer service in a way. So we were almost a company as a small team, right? Little departments, but we work very, very well to execute upon our strategy. So I would almost say that would be the first step, that you've got to take action and you've got to execute well. The second tactic was education. And we realized, bear in mind, we have got, well over 600 chapter directors and co-directors all around the world, that anything we were looking to do, we had to do it at scale. It was going to be very easy for us to look at it and say, hey, it's okay. We only need to look at hosting, 10 monthly events. So this is like, a simple doc and playbook that we can utilize to the community. That unfortunately was not going to work for us. We have chapters in some developing nations, as we have chapters in places where the internet speed is super, super fast and they have all the resources that they need. So we had to be very, very cognizant of the different demographics in our community. And more importantly, when it came to actually then defining the education piece, was to document everything. I'll post in the chat here a resource that you're all welcome to utilize. It's over at help.startupgrind.com. And this is our knowledge base for our community. It's open to the World Wide World. You don't need a startupgrind.com email account to access it. But that is where we were essentially documenting all our systems and processes and the knowledge base for our community, thereby providing education to support how they were going to go about hosting their virtual events. In addition to the knowledge base, we were then very proactive in ensuring that we hosted webinars. So there's always that saying, bring along people for the journey. So we brought along our chapter director communities as we were testing out different frameworks. We would bring them in and would host like a webinar, and some chapter directors would join. They'd give us kind of like instant feedback. And this was all happening in March. So we were like executing super quick. Again, as I mentioned at the top of the presentation, we were using startup principles that we needed to fail very, very quickly, because we knew that if we let things say, oh, we've got a 3-month or 6-month roadmap and let's put a strategy in place, nothing was essentially going to happen. So we had to act super, super quick in bringing our chapter directors along, testing out different platforms to see if they were going to be fit for purpose, and ultimately aligned with our goal of enabling and equipping our chapter directors communities to host, to continue to keep their startup ecosystems engaged. Moving from the education component was then the iterative process. And iteration is, again, one of those startup principles where it's like fail fast and you got to take the learnings and, improve. And honestly, that is something that the team did very, very well. And this is something that I personally cannot take any credit for. I've got to give a massive shout out to, Madeline, Daniel, Yasmin, G, Bruce, and Jess, who was super proactive in, taking these like one-to-one meetings with our chapter directors, taking the learnings, trying to figure out what was obviously working. We were fortunate again that we had some technical experts on our team where we were using a lot of no-code tools. So tools like you'll see on the screenshot, like Airtable. If you don't have Airtable in your stack, I would strongly recommend you have a look at it. It is one of the most versatile no-code platforms out there that those that are not super technical can utilize and leverage in their tech stack. So I saw, Deb here, who mentioned you're a one-person community team and community creator leader. That's fantastic. I hope you've got, Airtable in your tool stack. If you don't, it's worthwhile having a look at it to see how you can kind of incorporate it into some of your workflows. It's an absolutely brilliant tool. So what we kind of did in our iterative process is, once we had tested out the different platforms, we initially settled on Zoom, as you'll kind of see in the platform here. But it was super expensive. You're talking about having to get multiple licenses for all our chapter directors or multiple chapter directors. Because we held the Zoom license, we then had to literally jump on a call 15 minutes before it started with each and every chapter director that was utilizing our platform to essentially make it happen. As you'll see that number there, in a space of literally, I think that was like 2 to 3 months, we nearly had 687 submissions from our chapter director communities to utilize our Zoom licenses. So think about that, 687 form submissions. This was just simply not sustainable. But again, using our startup principles and iterative models, it allowed us to quickly test that, hey, actually, there's a lot of bit of demand here when it comes to virtual events. So let's kind of really kind of continue to push it as we go through it. Thankfully, our sister company, Bevy, was working on what we, and I will always say, was a game-changing tool or functionality for our community. We already utilized Bevy to manage our entire chapter community platform. Bevy had been built within Startup Grind, so it was very much a case of, solve your own itch. And we essentially, when they spun out as a separate entity, of course, it was again built for in person, but when they saw the world has shifted, then they quickly iterated themselves and created a Bevy virtual functionality, which is, which is essentially what we're kind of on now, which allowed us to essentially host virtual events. So from there, we quickly saw our events kind of tally up. We went from March, where we had 140 events, up to 329. At our peak in November, we essentially ended up hosting 366 events, which was phenomenal. So Bevy became almost like that central tool or central tech stack, or central, like the central tool and our toolkit that allowed us to kind of scale virtual events rapidly. Some of the other tools that we essentially used in our actual tech stack included then Airtable, which I mentioned earlier on. We also then had Streak, which is a CRM system, which allowed us to obviously keep our chapter communities engaged. And then last but certainly not least in it, we knew that we had to be empathetic to our community. They were going through a lot personally and professionally. So yes, great, we could be very strategic and we could be very, very tactic. But I always say community, one of the things that's very important about us is there's a human level element to us and everything that we essentially do. And the screenshot I've got here, this is our help desk inbound inquiries that came through. And whilst we saw a dip in the number of inbound, the reason being is we provided our chapter directors extra support. So those 15-minute calls just before meetings were taking place became instrumental in providing our chapter directors extra support and empathy and hearing them out, and just being essentially a shoulder for them to kind of continue to keep their local startup ecosystems engaged, which took a lot of work, was not sustainable, but was, I think, very, very critical in the early days for us to really help them. But as Bevy kind of came along, it changed the game. It allowed our chapter directors to essentially have autonomy when it comes to creating their events, setting them up, publishing them, and jumping obviously on the call beforehand, which honestly for us has been an absolute game changer. So in conclusion and in summary, that's the formula for our success. Strategy plus tactics equals success. Happy to take any questions, and I'll bring CP back on stage and see if we can answer a handful of questions. I'll stop sharing as well.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Phin. Incredible. We definitely have some questions here. So we just have about 3 minutes. So I'm going to hop in and we'll try to get to as many of these as we can. So Nina has a question here. She says, how did you team up and share the responsibilities to deliver the events?
Great. So we typically operate on a regional basis as our community managers. So we have community managers for APAC, EMEA, and the Americas. So each of those community managers was responsible for delivering like the community management side of things. But I think the question is, how did the attendee?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, that's the next question. Sorry, I thought I was reading that. But that's how we do it. We have community managers that are based on regions.
Fabulous. Do you want to take the next question? Nina also had a second question there.
Yeah, so how did the attendee numbers change when you pivoted from live events to virtual events? Great question. In the beginning, we saw our virtual numbers go up because the world was shut down. There was a lot of excitement around virtual events. So our numbers went up when last check actually by 15%. The problem was our attendee numbers, like check-ins. So, RSVPs versus check-ins, which is a metric that we measure, we're roughly at about 45%. So for every 100 attendees, you would have 45 people on average were essentially kind of showing up. We're actually seeing that number drop down now, and it's very much as a result of, as everyone is saying, VEF, virtual event fatigue. And so we're having to try again, use the same process to be creative on how we can kind of continue to keep our communities engaged.
Fabulous. And before I get to the last question here, I just want to say, read Deb's comment. She says, I'm taking a ton of notes. This is super helpful for me and clients I work with in my consulting biz. So love to see in the comments there all of the value that you're bringing. All right, so Rishi has a question and says, would you consider mastery of Airtable a very valuable skill for a community? If so, what is the best way to go about this and offer that to communities?
So Airtable for us is a very versatile platform because it's a database / CRM. So, and it's no code. And then there's been a lot of talk, and there's been loads of workshops around no code tools. So I would certainly say mastering Airtable can allow you to almost have it as your main platform. And then you don't have to worry about having, a separate CRM system and then a MongoDB and all these, especially if you're non-technical or not super technical. Airtable mastery can definitely be leveraged a lot. We love it. We use it across company-wide now. Many companies use it, and it's a very, very powerful tool.
All right, I'll stick one more question in real quick. Loisent says, thoughts on Trello?
We used to use Trello. We now do it in Airtable. Again, this is why it's such a versatile tool. So all that project management, it's got Kanban bands, like all that tracking, all of that stuff can be done in Airtable. So it's one tool. It's like a Swiss Army knife. As we kind of like refer to it as our community team, that you can definitely leverage it for different use cases.
Fabulous. And with that, we have run out of time, but everyone here, please help me in thanking Phin for this incredible session. Let us know in the comments, get those virtual clapping hands there, and put your comments in there. Thank him so much. Phin, thank you so much for your time and sharing all of your knowledge with us. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely loved it. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. My email address is phin@startupgrind.com. If you have additional questions, more than happy to help out.
Fabulous. Thank you. And
thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you to the audience for tuning in. So happy to have you here. So thank you. Please do stick around.